in your chapter 5, you talk about who built the ancient structures, and I want to do this now because there's so much fun things here that I'll end up missing it. But you in this chapter you talk about, again, just what we see around the world. I think everybody who is at least somewhat knowledgeable, maybe you've seen a National Geographic or even an Ancient Aliens program, where there's a lot of megalithic, the mega means big, lithic is stone, these large stone structures around the world, not just above ground, but also below ground. Mm-hmm. And you had the chance to go to Malta. And I really want you to share this because I know you had, I've known you for 3 years now, and you've kind of given me little glimpses here and there, but reading this in here, I was like, oh man, I want to talk to Larry again about this because you provided kind of a more thorough, and you even referenced the 1940 edition of the National Geographic, which I was able to find and download because I want to read about it. But you had a chance to go to Malta. So again, there's these structures that we have above ground, whether it's Stonehenge or the pyramids, or even down in South America, Cusco and others. But there's also structures underground. So talk about your experience in Malta.
Okay, we'll start there. How's that? Mm-hmm. I was going to be speaking at a church in Malta, and Bob came to me one day. We were having coffee, and he said, I'm going to be going to Israel. Is there some place that would be good to stop off? And I said, have you ever considered Malta? Mm-hmm. And he said, no, I haven't. And in reality, there's more megalithic structures and temples on Malta than any place else in the world.
Wow.
And the second oldest temple in the world is found in Malta. So I talked with him about it, and the next thing you know, L.A. Marzulli and Bob and I, we ended up in Malta.
So Malta, an island in the Mediterranean.
It's a European Union country, and it's in the Mediterranean. There are popes that have lived there. Knights Templar built a lot of places there. It was the most bombed place in World War II.
Wow.
Because of its location. But it's a very unique island, beautiful, beautiful place, wonderful people there. But we were able, through a series of events and connections, to go to a place called the Hypergeum. Now, what happened back around the turn of the century, there was a man who was...
Like the 20th century?
Yes.
Like 1900, okay.
He was cutting stones for a cistern, because the island is almost solid rock. And there's a series of islands, but the main island, and they're almost all solid rock. And there's a rainy season and a dry season, and so they had these places where they stored water during the rainy season, and they cut these cisterns into the solid stone. And when this rock mason was cutting a stone, instead of being able to pull it out, it dropped down. And there was a cavern. And so they investigated and found out that actually underground in this stone was an underground palace.
Oh, wow.
And it was huge. And the Department of Antiquities started doing research on it. And there were tunnels. Some tunnels were reported to go under the Mediterranean all the way to Rome. And it's something that it's just a very unique place. In fact, they found several thousand skeletons in this palace, underground palace, hewn out of solid stone, and a lot of them had elongated skulls.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And it's interesting that the bones back in the 50s and 60s mysteriously disappeared.
It's always the case, isn't it? Yeah.
They had some pictures, but the bones went away. Well, at any rate, it's open now, and by appointment you can go down into the Hypergeum, and L.A. Marzulli and my son and myself and Bob Ulrich, we were able to go down into this underground palace. Now,
you couldn't bring, right?
Oh, the United Nations guards this, and it was tighter than security at the airport. We had to take out our watches, our phones, flashlights, cameras. We couldn't take anything electronic in order to go in, and they put them in cabinets, and they would give them to us when we left. And it was very low light. They had one skull on display on the inside in very low light. And I remember L.A. Marzulli trying to get down and look at it.
Of course he did.
He was examining it.
Yep.
But this underground palace, there's archways, there's the oracle room. There's one place where a man can stand and speak in a normal voice, and you can hear it throughout the entire complex. You can stand a few feet away, and you can't. But there's this one place in an oracle room. Okay. And for some reason, and don't know why, but a woman's voice won't carry. It has to be a man's voice. And but the tunnels are so extensive. Back in the 1940s, there was a school teacher, I believe a couple of school teachers that wanted to take their elementary classes on a field trip. And so they were allowed to go down in there and kind of explore this underground palace and some of the tributaries. They never found them. In fact, for weeks, they had search parties looking for them. They went down into this palace, and they never were found.
Never were found, ever.
Never were found. In fact, what you were talking about earlier, there's an article that I was told was in the 1940s issue of National Geographic where they documented this about the students being lost.
I just found it, yeah. You can find it online.
I mentioned it one day, and somebody researched and found the original articles and the original magazines and sent them to me. So I had them in my possession. But it's interesting. The government then, they sealed off these tunnels. They sealed off these tunnels. But it's interesting that they have gigantua. They have actual places above ground. And Marzulli and Ulrich and myself, Bob Ulrich and L.A. Marzulli and myself, we stood at some of these places that were, they looked like chairs where the king and queen would sit in them. Mm-hmm. And the
now
knees...
you're a big guy.
Oh, well,
you're tall.
Where the knee was above my head.
Wow.
Now, it's kind of interesting. These megalithic stones they weighed tons. We asked the guide from the United Nations, from UNESCO, we said, how did they get these stones here? I mean, this is impossible. Well, there were these little round stones that were everywhere. Uh-huh. And he said, well, they put them on those little round stones and they rolled them. The fact that they rolled them over the ocean and several miles on these little stones that would have been crushed by these megalithic stones, it was ridiculous. It was the politically correct way.